The first time she heard them laugh, it wasn't loud. It was that sharp, clipped kind of laughter, the kind meant for each other, not for her. It came from the far end of the lawyer's table, where her stepmother sat, flanked by two half-brothers who shared the same smile, the same eyes, and the same unshakable confidence that she didn't belong. They were dividing her late father Sep's estate. The polished mahogany desk between them was covered in neatly stacked folders, some heavy with property deeds, others with bank accounts and business shares. Her pile was small. Finally, the lawyer slid a thin manila envelope toward her. Inside was a single yellowed deed, the kind you could almost smell through the paper. "This," her stepmother said, voice thick with false sympathy, "was all your father thought you could handle, an old abandoned farmhouse, outside town. No running water, no market value, but at least you can say you own something." The brothers grinned. One even chuckled outright. And here sits the part they didn't say out loud, but she felt it in the room. They believed they'd just ended her story before it could begin. She nodded, silent, her fingers tracing the brittle edge of the deed. The farmhouse was 30 miles outside the city, on a plot no developer wanted, in a place most people had forgotten. She didn't know it yet, but inside that crumbling house lay something they had overlooked. Something that would not only rewrite her fortune, but expose every rotten root of the game they had been playing all along. Here sits what that moment teaches us, and it sits a principle I've seen in business, in family politics and in history. When people hand you what looks like nothing, they're revealing what they don't see. And often that unseen value is the sharpest weapon you will ever hold. But before we get to that discovery, you need to understand why they thought she'd never stand a chance. Because in their minds, they weren't set giving her an abandoned house. They were burying her in it. To understand the cruelty of that moment in the lawyer's office, you need to know where her story began, and how the rules of this family had always been written without her name in the margins. Her father had been a man of discipline and ambition, the kind who built everything with his own hands. But success didn't make him softer, if anything it made him more exacting. He remarried when she was 9. Her mother was gone, and the new woman came with 2 sons, polished, competitive, and always circling close to their mother's ear. From the beginning there were unspoken tears in that household. The boys were heirs in training, being groomed in golf lessons, private tutors, and casual introductions to their father's business partners. She was the quiet one, expected to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention came her way. But here sits the thing about systems of injustice inside a family. They don't just happen in big moments of betrayal. They grow in the small, daily inequities. The after-dinner conversations she wasn't invited into. The way her ideas at the dinner table were ignored until a brother repeated them. The subtle message that real value lived only in the hands of those who were already deemed valuable. By the time she turned 18, the gap was clear. Her stepmother managed the family's accounts with precision, always for the good of the estate, while ensuring her own children got the best opportunities. She, on the other hand, was quietly steered toward practical paths, community college, modest jobs, and the expectation she'd never aim too high. Psychologists call this expectancy theory, the idea that when people consistently signal low expectations for you, your environment subtly shapes you to meet them. The family wasn't just waiting for her to fail, they were engineering the conditions for it. And yet, life has a strange way of planting resilience in the very soil where you've been underestimated. She had learned how to live lean, how to notice the details others ignored, how to read a room without saying much at all. These skills were invisible to them, but they were about to become her greatest leverage. Still, when her father died unexpectedly, the scale of her exclusion became undeniable. The will, though legal, had fingerprints of bias all over it. Her brothers inherited prime properties, cash accounts, and the shares of their father's company. She got the farmhouse. A building they thought had no value, sitting on land they believed no one wanted. But that sits the root cause of their mistake. When people think power comes only from wealth, they stop seeing value in anything else. She didn't yet know what she set find out there. But she was about to learn that the abandoned things people discard often hold the kind of power they fear the most. 2 days after the will reading, she stood in the gravel driveway of the farmhouse. The building loomed in front of her like a forgotten skeleton, roof sagging, paint flaking away in strips, windows clouded with years of dust. The front porch was bowed in the middle, as if the house itself was tired of standing. She could still hear her brother's voices in her head. She once did last a week out there. It sets basically a teardown. Maybe she can sell it for scrap wood. The words pressed on her chest like a weight. This was the fork in the road. She had 2 choices. Cut her losses, sell it for whatever pittance she could get, swallow the insult, and disappear quietly from their world. Lean in, Walk through that rotting door and find out if there was anything here worth fighting for. The first option promised safety, or at least the illusion of it. The second, it was an open invitation to disappointment. Standing there, she felt the cold edge of a truth most people don't like to face. It's just not the insults that break you. It's the quiet agreement you make with them when you stop showing up. Her father had once told her, back when she was small enough to still believe she could do anything, sometimes the only way to change the ending is to step deeper into the place they hope you leave. She ran her fingers over the rusted doorknob. The lock gave way with a reluctant click. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of old wood and rain that had slipped through the roof for years. And yet as her eyes adjusted, something caught her attention. A faint outline on the far wall, like a door hidden behind the wallpaper. Her heart thudded once, hard. She didn't know it yet, but that was the moment her choice solidified. She wasn't set here to prove her family wrong. She was here to find the thing they didn't even know they'd lost. The wallpaper was brittle, patterned with faded roses that had long since lost their color. She pressed her palm against the outline, feeling the slight give of wood beneath. The edges weren't perfect, they curved just enough to suggest it had been built for secrecy, not decoration. She fetched a pocket knife from her bag, the same one her father had given her when she was 16. The blade slid under the paper, peeling it back inch by inch, until the faint rectangle became clear. A narrow wooden panel, flush with the wall. She tugged at the handle, stuck. Then, with a slow, deliberate pull, it creaked open. Inside was a short, dark passageway. Her first thought was that it might be a storage space, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw the glint of something metal. A small trunk, no bigger than a carry-on suitcase, sat in the dust. The latch wasn't locked, just stiff from years of disuse. She opened it. Neatly stacked inside were envelopes, thick, heavy, each marked with dates going back more than 40 years. Every one of them bore her father Sit's handwriting. She sat cross-legged on the floor, tearing one open. Inside was a letter, not to her stepmother, not to her brothers, but to her. The date was from when she was just a child. If you are reading this, I trust you Sit found this place because you were looking for it. Everything in these letters will tell you the truth about this land, our family, and the deals that were made to protect it. You may be the only one left who can set it right. She froze. Truth about the land? She rifled through more envelopes. Inside some were maps, in others, deeds and contracts, some signed, some suspiciously unsigned. And in the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in oilcloth, was a second, older deed, one that listed not just the house but the surrounding acreage. Her pulse quickened. Her brothers had assumed the farmhouse was worthless because they thought it sat on a barren lot. They never knew it came with over 200 acres, land that bordered an expanding industrial corridor. She didn't know the full value yet, but one thing was clear, this wasn't a consolation prize. It was leverage. And here sits what that moment teaches us. Sometimes power hides in plain sight, wrapped in neglect, because the people who dismiss you have stopped looking closely. The skill is in noticing when others stop noticing. But she also knew this. If she moved too soon, her family would find a way to take it back. She had to be strategic, invisible until the right moment. For the next few weeks, she visited the farmhouse quietly. No phone calls, no paper trail, no signs of renovation. She started with research, county records, land surveys, zoning maps. Every evening she came back with more pieces of the puzzle, stacking them in neat folders that never left her sight. But secrecy has a half-life. One afternoon, while leaving the county clerk's office, she spotted a familiar car parked 2 rows over. Her stepmother Sit's silver sedan. That night, the calls began. First, her youngest half-brother pretending to check in but quickly probing about whether she planned to sell. Then the older one, less polite, more pointed. If you sober smart, you so take a cash offer now, before that place eats you alive. By the weekend, the gloves were off. Her stepmother invited her to brunch, the kind of invitation that was never really a request. The meeting was a performance, warm smiles, casual talk about family, and then the ambush. A manila envelope slid across the table, a purchase agreement, already drafted, offering her just enough money to make walking away seem tempting. She refused. The reaction was instant. The warmth evaporated. Her stepmother leaned in, voice low, eyes hard. You don't have the means to hold on to that property. Taxes, repairs, upkeep, it sits a money pit, and if you try to get clever, we will challenge your claim in court. This is what systemic pressure looks like when it wears a familiar face. It's not just the threat of legal action, it's the psychological weight of being told you don't have the right to keep what's yours. The pressure worked, at least for a moment. The next week, a notice arrived. She was behind on property taxes. She hadn't even known were due. Then a letter from a zoning board suggesting the property was in violation of safety codes. By the third blow, a visit from a local inspector threatening fines, the walls began to close in. One rainy afternoon, she sat in the kitchen of the farmhouse, staring at the letters spread across the table. For the first time, she felt the sting of defeat, not because she didn't believe in herself, but because the system was designed to outlast her. Her father's words about stepping deeper echoed in her mind, but they felt faint against the static of exhaustion. Her hands trembled. The papers blurred. And for a brief bitter moment, she wondered if they had been right all along. It was the kind of rain that seemed to seep into your bones, steady, cold and relentless. She sat at the farmhouse kitchen table, the letters and tax notices spread before her like an accusation. A half-empty mug of coffee had gone cold hours ago. She didn't even hear the knock at first. It was only when the old front door gave a low groan that she looked up. In the doorway stood Mr. Green, a wiry man in his 70s, wearing a cap from the local feed store. She recognized him instantly. He'd been her father's friend for decades, the kind who knew more about the land than any county record ever could. He stepped inside without ceremony, pulling off his wet jacket. "He told me you might find it," Mr. Green said, nodding toward the trunk she'd discovered. "And he told me, if you ever did, you need help." They talked for hours. About the history of the land, how her grandfather had bought not just the farmhouse, but mineral rights buried deep beneath it. About how her father had quietly fought off developers for years, believing the property would one day be worth far more than anyone realized. "Your stepmother doesn't know about the mineral rights," Mr. Green said, "and neither do those boys. But the companies sniffing around the industrial corridor, they pay for what steps under your feet, not just what sits on it." That was the moment the fog in her mind began to lift. The problem wasn't that she lacked resources. The problem was she had been playing defense, reacting to their moves instead of setting the terms. Mr. Green leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You don't have to fight them head on. Let them think you stir drowning. While they watch, you work with the people who really want this land, but you make sure the deal is on your terms, quiet, binding, and untouchable." She thought about that for a long time. It was risky, it meant patience, it meant letting her family believe they were winning. But it also meant she could build a strategy in the shadows, where they couldn't sabotage it. Here sits what that moment teaches us. A single shift in perspective can turn an impossible fight into a solvable puzzle. Sometimes victory isn't about overpowering your opponent, it's about making them play a game they don't even know they're in. By the time the rain stopped, she had a plan. And this time she wouldn't just survive their attacks. She sit to make sure the endgame was hers. She didn't rush. That was the first discipline. When you're underestimated, the greatest mistake you can make is proving yourself too soon. For the next 3 months, she let her family believe she was worn down. She returned their calls with vague answers. She sighed when they brought up the burden of the property. She even let a few zoning notices sit unanswered, just enough to keep the illusion alive. But quietly, she was moving. Mr. Green introduced her to a retired land surveyor, who confirmed what they suspected: the mineral rights beneath the property were intact, and legally hers. He also mapped the full extent of the land, showing her how the industrial corridor was inching closer each year. From there she reached out to a mineral rights attorney, not in her county, but 2 towns over, where no one in her stepmother's circle would notice. The attorney confirmed the rights were transferable, negotiable, and highly valuable if approached strategically. Step by step, she built her leverage. She quietly paid off the back taxes in a lump sum, filing the receipt where only she and her lawyer had access. She began cataloging the farmhouse's historical value, working with a preservationist who told her that certain grants and tax protections could apply if she played her cards right. She gathered every letter, map, and deed from her father's trunk, making certified copies that could be produced instantly in any legal dispute. She didn't post about it. She didn't brag to friends. She let the work speak in silence. Psychologists call this the illusion of compliance, allowing your opposition to believe you're aligned with their expectations, even as you prepare to overturn them. It sits the opposite of confrontation. It's chess, not boxing. By late spring she was in final talks with an energy company interested in the rights. They didn't care about the farmhouse. They cared about what lay beneath it. And the offer on the table was more than 10 times what her stepmother had tried to buy her out for. The beauty of the deal: once signed, it would be legally binding. No court challenge could touch it. All she had to do now was wait for the right moment to make it public. The moment when the reversal would be undeniable. The timing had to be perfect. She waited until the deal with the energy company was signed, notarized, and filed in 3 separate jurisdictions. Every clause airtight. Every document immune to misinterpretation. Then she set the stage. It was her stepmother's idea to call another family meeting at the same lawyer's office where this had all begun. The pretext was simple, a final attempt to convince her to sell before maintenance costs swallowed her whole. She arrived quietly, just as they were settling in. The same mahogany table. The same smug expressions. Her stepmother slid a new offer across the table, a modest increase from the last, but still a fraction of the property's worth. She glanced at the papers, then at each of them in turn. "I appreciate the concern," she said calmly, "but I think I shall keep it. In fact, I've already sold something far more valuable than the house." The room went still. Her older half-brother frowned. "What do you mean?" She reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of the mineral rights transfer agreement, complete with the energy company's logo and the payout figure printed in bold. The lawyer Set's eyes widened. Her stepmother Sit's mouth opened, then closed again. "This is binding," she continued, "filed and recorded. The money SIP's already in escrow, and the best part, the rights are gone from the land entirely. Even if I sold you the house tomorrow, you couldn't touch what sits underneath it." Her brothers leaned forward, scanning the pages in disbelief. The payout number wasn't just large, it was transformative. More than enough to renovate the farmhouse, pay taxes for decades, and invest in whatever future she chose. She let the silence stretch. This wasn't just about gloating. It was about allowing them to feel the full weight of the reversal, that the worthless property they'd mocked had just outperformed every one of their prime assets. Here's what that moment teaches us. Revenge does instead always roar. Sometimes it walks into the room with quiet papers and an unshakable calm, leaving those who underestimated you to reckon with their own blindness. The meeting ended without another offer. No one laughed on the way out. In the weeks that followed, word spread quietly but steadily. It wasn't her doing. She never once spoke to the press, never posted about it online. But in small towns, big wins don't stay secret for long. At the local cafe, people who once pitied her now greeted her with a nod of respect. The bank manager, who had always kept conversations brief, suddenly offered her a seat in his office. And the county officials who had once sent her threatening letters? They now sent notices of cooperation and updated zoning support. Her family SIP's reaction was more complicated. Her brothers avoided direct contact, though one sent a terse text, "Congrats, guess we underestimated you." Her stepmother, on the other hand, showed up at the farmhouse unannounced, one afternoon. She walked the perimeter slowly, as though looking for a way to claim some piece of it back. When she finally approached the porch, she tried to soften her voice. "We are still family. Surely there's a way we can work together." She smiled, polite, but unyielding. "We are family, which is why I hope you understand that I sit in keeping what sets is mine." That was the last time they spoke in person. But the real redemption wasn't in shutting them out, it was in what she did next. She took part of the mineral rights payout, and set up a community trust to restore historic properties in the area. She hired local crews for the farmhouse renovations, paying them well above standard rates. And she began hosting small workshops in the barn, teaching young people how to understand land rights, contracts, and generational wealth. Because here sits the truth. Winning for yourself is one thing. But changing the game for others, that's how you turn a personal victory into a lasting legacy. By the end of the year, the farmhouse was no longer a ruin. Its white paint gleamed in the sun, the porch was rebuilt, and the fields around it had been cleared. It stood not as a monument to her family's cruelty, but as proof that being underestimated is often the greatest starting point you could ask for. When she first held that brittle deed in the lawyer SIP's office, it felt like a dismissal, a polite way of saying, "You don't matter here." Now standing on the porch of the restored farmhouse, she understood something deeper. The things we're given in mockery often hold the seeds of our transformation. Her victory wasn't about the mineral rights or the payout. It was about learning how to move in silence when the noise around you is designed to break your focus. It was about seeing value where others saw waste, and having the patience to let that value ripen before revealing it. Here sits what that journey teaches us. Patience is a weapon when paired with preparation. Silence is not weakness, it's the space where strategies are born. And revenge that educates is the only kind worth pursuing. I want you to think about the abandoned farmhouse in your own life. It might not be land or property, it might be an overlooked talent, a forgotten skill, a network you've never tapped into. Ask yourself, what have others dismissed in me that I've yet to fully claim? Because sometimes, the thing you've been taught to ignore, is the very thing that will change your story. So here sits my invitation, not just as a storyteller, but as someone who's seen these patterns play out in real life. If this story resonated with you, don't just walk away inspired. Start mapping out your own quiet strategy. Identify the leverage others can't see, and nurture it until the day it becomes undeniable. And when that day comes, when the reversal is yours, make sure your win opens a door for someone else. Because legacy isn't set about what you keep. It's sets about what you pass forward. If this spoke to your values, like, comment, and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but because the more we share stories like this, the more people learn that being underestimated isn't the end. It sets the beginning.